Doing today? All right, all right, all right. Oh man, it's awesome to meet with you all again to talk about some of the things that's been going on through the week. Welcome to another episode of social work. I'm sorry, what is this episode? Welcome again to another episode of This Week in Supervision. I'm your host, Troy Wise. Glad to have you. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about what we discussed in supervision. I think that it's important that when you are working with your supervisees, that you don't just assume that they know certain things. You have to ask questions, just like what we do with our clients when we're in psychotherapy. We ask questions to determine, hey, is this something that you need to know about? Is it we don't want to make assumptions, and actually that's one of the things that we talked about in supervision is just in one of the groups was not making assumptions. um uh I've been going through a coaching some training, and one of the things that they were saying is that everything needs to be processed. If someone says that, for instance, I had a client that said that they were close to their parents, so or close to their sibling or loved one, and so um, I automatically assumed from my lens that they would talk to that person, maybe um, you know three, 4 times a week, or 2 or 3 times a week, several times a week, because they're close. But after talking to the client and processing things, I realized that they were only talking to that person maybe once a month or less. It just wasn't a lot, but they considered themselves to be close. We actually had to process some of that. And the thing is that we can't judge what's close or what's not close. It's based on individuals' experiences and things like that. But my point is that a lot of times, unless we process certain things with our clients, we can assume wrong. And so it's important to process things. So that's something that we talked about, just to not assume, but ask questions. Um, and so we talked about a few other things, and we don't want to assume. Again, that's how I got to that point. Sometimes I forget how I got there. Let's bring it back home. Sometimes we assume that our supervisees know more than what they may, because they may have not been exposed to certain things, or it may have been a while since they have been exposed to it, or they may be using different techniques. And sometimes when you test, you get to see. And it was a good bit of my supervisees that had not. Were not familiar with some of the tools that we're going to discuss relative to diagnosing depression. I was interviewing somebody, um, or they were interviewing me to see if they wanted to come on board to be, in one of my supervision groups. And when I broke it down, they were like, "Yeah, this is kind of like class." And for a moment, I was like, "Man, this is not class." But when I thought about it, they were correct. Because in supervision, my supervision, the way it's handled, it's and they were actually attracted to that. It's a hybrid between kind of learning things on a more deeper level, and what we do is maybe take some of the things learned in theory and help them to better understand what this looks like in practice, in your practice area of focus. This is how you bring this in. Okay. And so we're not just dangling around ideas about theories in our minds, but we're learning how to apply those principles into practice. And that's a lot what we do, or we help them to elevate what they have already learned to apply into practice and take it to a different level, or to explore it. And so that's what we do. So I want to get into what we talked about concerning ways that the person could, or that the supervisees could assess and diagnose depression. But before I get into that, I do want to share. Um, I want to share some of what we have, if I can find it. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, I want to share some of what we have up on the docket, as far as some of the programming now, some of the trainings that we have coming up. Um, and we're gonna share that right here. Okay. Here we go. All right, we are excited about this training, um, life coaching for social workers, and we're just going to spend a quick second on this. Life coaching for social workers, empowerment and self care. The talk about coaching and social work is an interesting topic. Well, we're going to hear from Patricia Corbett, and she's awesome. And I know Patricia personally, and so many for we've worked together in so many different ways, and she's going to present. Um, and so you want to be there for this event. Now, if you're a member, you kind of get a hookup. For everybody else who are not, then it's about $10 for the ticket if you catch the early bird. And so we want to see you there. We want to see you there. Also, we have coming up in just about a week and a half or so our next supervision training. So if you want to be a supervisor, we have a supervisor training coming up on March 25th and 26th. Please check us out. Come and and learn how to be a supervisor. And we have a bonus that a lot of people don't know about that teaches you how to go out and be able to get people to come into your group, the things to say. And I'm gonna probably be adding on to that because I'm learning new techniques myself. Also, we have the DSM-5 training. I love this training on and that will be on April the 30th because you all asked. It was on demand. We went on and got that together, and we're going to have Amanda presenting. Amanda is one of my former supervisees, and I'm so excited that she's going to be adding, and Dr. Jennifer Ritchie as well. And so, also, if you are interested in catching a DSM-5 training, for those of you all don't know, it is now required that we have a DSM-5 comprehensive training. If you're a LICSW, we have this where you can get it. You can do the training online. It's self-paced, and so you can just kind of have it at your fingertips. All right, let's move on into what we have today. Okay, and so how we started out with the group, right? Today, I like to do a lot of psychotherapy stuff, but and we normally do that, but I want to share with you some of the other things that we do as well. And so we started off this particular session with a question, and the question was, if you had someone to come into the office that you suspected might have signs and symptoms of depression, how would you assess and determine that they have this diagnosis? Okay, so this is very important to know, because again, the problem has been is that many people roll out of supervision. We're supposed to learn this in school, but a lot of times we don't, unfortunately. So I'm just saying we don't in general. So that's not pointing anybody out. But the fact is that we don't really learn that. We don't know how to put this into practice. We may have a DSM course, but then when it comes to actually using these skills or what skills to actually make a diagnosis, we don't a lot of times know how to do that properly. And that's why I think it's so important to have the right type of, especially if you want to go into psychotherapy, the right type of placement where you can get that experience ahead of time. But for some of us, we're not in that area, and I like that social work is diverse, and so we don't necessarily have to be all the way in that way, but we need to know what's going on. And so we use this, and amazingly so, a lot of people were wanting more information about it, and so that was good because I was hoping that I could share some insights. And so the question was, what would you use? What would you use? And so a number of different responses came about. And so what would you use? What would you use to diagnose depression? And so we talked a little bit about a few tools that we can use to help us with our assessment. And I think this is really good also for students and people who are in practice, understanding. Let's go on and get back to here, and I'm gonna share my screen. Um, and so we had a number of different tools, and one was the PHQ-9. I really like this tool, and it's very simple to use. And so we had a demonstration of okay, so what would you what would you how you would we actually, and this is a good idea. We actually I think so. Well, we actually had the group to split off and take this tool, and I gave them an example of a case, and I may not be able to share that, but I had a male and a female case, and so what they were supposed to do is one person would be the one who's assessing, and then one person was John, one person might be Sarah, and they had to act that thing out. Okay. And so that went over pretty well. We didn't get to do that with all the groups because we just get to talking, or I get to talking, and so many things happen. But the thing I like about the PHQ-9 is that once you add things up, so is this happening? Little interest or pleasure in doing things? Not at all. Several days, more than half the days, nearly every day. Okay, so you circle which one is correct. You scroll down, and here we have our key. We have our key, and this will help us to determine where we are. And the thing I like about this is that a lot of times I'm just not even using these types of tools sometimes because I kind of know in my mind what the diagnosis, I mean, what the symptoms are and things like that. But one reason to use this is because it breaks down, like, if they do have depression, is it minimal depression, mild, is it moderate, is it moderately severe, is it severe depression? And based on the scores, you can determine this. Now, another tool that was mentioned that I was really happy to hear was the Beck Depression Inventory. And so this was another tool that was introduced to the group, and we kind of went through um you know how the questions, or we just kind of had an overview. And just like the PHQ-9, at the end it helps you to determine what level of depression the person is having, if they're having any depression at all. Now, what we did do is um, ask another question. Okay, we asked the question, wanted to find out from the group. Um, some of y'all mentioned a Beck Depression Inventory. Um, who is Beck? Does anybody know who Beck is? If I just say, yeah, Beck this, Beck that, Beck that, he has, they have this depression scale. It's called the Beck depression inventory, whatever. Like, what? Who is Beck, right? And so it was really interesting to find out that a number of us, really did not know who Beck was. Okay, and so this was an opportunity. See, again, we can't assume that our supervisees know everything. Um, we can't assume that they know about these depressions. So, but if they go out and they don't do good practice, and you didn't discuss this in supervision, that's probably not good. So we want to make sure that things are being covered. And so when we start talking about Beck, like, and I want to ask you all, do you all know who Beck is? And so yeah, so we talked about who Beck was, and we also showed a video about Beck, Aaron Beck. And I said, it's interesting that he is so popular but unpopular, because when I asked the question, okay, what is one of the evidence-based therapies mostly used that's really effective for something like depression or anxiety or something like that, then without fail, almost everybody would say CBT. But um, interestingly enough, many of us did not know that cognitive behavioral therapy was a development of Aaron Beck. And so we want to know that, because actually that could probably end up on the clinical exam, a question like that. So we talked about that. We talked about how to use these tools, and I also went over with them. I wanted them to be well acclimated with how to be able to I'm sorry, give me a moment. I'm about to share my screen. Um well, I guess I am sharing my screen, huh? So I wanted them to be able to be acclimated to um how to, like, if we're looking at depression, what are the symptoms of depression, for instance? Okay. And so, according to the DSM, again, I like to go over and over and over again with this mnemonic. And this is kind of what I use to help me with diagnosis, that and it comes from the DSM. So Siggy Caps tells us that if my person is having issues with sleep, if they're having issues with their interests, interests, if they're having issues with guilt. Okay, and then we know with guilt comes shame and blame. If you have one, you have them all. Okay, guilt. Um, if we are having fluctuations in our energy levels, or experiencing what? Also fatigue. Okay. Um, if we are, and we're gonna skip down to having some concerns with concentration. Okay, concentration. Uh, let's see. Concentration. Okay. Uh, appetite. Excuse me, I might not spell stuff right. I'm sorry. Appetite, psychomotor, agitation. And this is a good one to go over because most people don't know what psychomotor agitation is. Okay. And then we have suicidal ideation or suicidality. Probably didn't say that. Suicidal ideation. Okay. So these are the symptoms, and I believe we just need to have about 5 of these. Well, that's quite a bit. 5 of the roughly 9. Uh and then we know that we have depression going on. Another thing that is important to know, and we talked a little bit about this, is that when we're diagnosing depression, um, you know, uh in order to even meet criteria of depression, the person would have to have first, number 1, um, depressed mood, okay? Or number 2, which is a lack of pleasure, which we also know as anhedonia, or lack of interest. Okay. And so we talked a little bit about that. So these are some things as well to help them with better assessment. These things help us to rule out, and then you'll test them and say, how long do they have to have these symptoms? And this is the basics, but we go over and over and over again. So it glues, because again, it's important for your supervisees to understand that the majority of diagnoses that you're going to have, and I think it's well over 50%, but don't quote me on that. I'm not, I'm not okay. Is going to be mood or anxiety or mood disorders. It's going to be mostly probably what everybody sees. So we want to know how to diagnose generalized anxiety disorder. We want to know how to diagnose depression and social anxiety and all the rest of them, bipolar, those type of situations. We want to be able to have that at top of mind. Okay. So anyway, that is a bit of what we talked about. It seems like I'm leaving out something that I wanted to include. And one thing was this. Let's just leave off with this, because I gotta close this out because I'm going too long. Okay, so this one, this is the question, a question that was asked. What technique did Dr. Beck, Aaron Beck, use to help his patients challenge their negative beliefs? Now, when we talked about Aaron Beck, we also had some video. Okay. This is a good video. Uh, that would break down some things about Aaron Beck. All right. And the name of the video, he describes in this video, and we went over this, how he came up and developed the theory of his theory on depression and just some of the CBT developments. Okay. And we learned that Beck was under the impression that in order, when somebody has depression, that they pretty much are turning inward, and they have a need to suffer. In other words, they don't mind suffering. They're just kind of in this funk, and they have a need to suffer. but he determined and discovered that that wasn't so, and that what was really happening is that they were having misinterpretations of reality. Anyway, so this is something that you can look up on YouTube, and it'll help you with that. When we got to the question, what technique did Beck use to help patients to challenge their negative beliefs? A, mindfulness meditation. B, dream analysis. C, rational emotive therapy. D, cognitive restructuring. And the answer for this one was cognitive restructuring, D. So if you chose D, you got that right. Okay. Well, let me ask y'all this. How about dream analysis? Dream analysis. What would be the answer for dream analysis? Who developed that? Whose thing was that? Well, we know that would be Sigmund Freud. What about rational emotive behavior? Who developed that? So what we're doing is getting them in the habit of studying things for not just what they got wrong, but also or what they got right. But the other answers there, we want to make sure we're familiar with that, because that could come back up on the exam as well. And so Albert Ellis here in mindfulness meditation, I believe Marsha Linehan, I probably didn't say her name right, but she's responsible for DBT, which is a derivative or a branch off, it's developed off of CBT. Um, but mindfulness, she says that she's responsible for bringing that into, I believe, into psychotherapy, because I think this is more of a Zen practice, a Zen move, mindfulness. And so this is what we talk about. I better end it now. Let me stop my share. Hopefully this was helpful. Certainly, if you have any questions or things that can help you with your supervision journeys, let me know. DM me, send me a DM. But until next time, we'll see you all. Y'all take care.